into the first chapter then. So here's the first chapter. I used to have an earlier motivational section about cryptocurrencies, which I had a lot in my previous time I taught this course, but people have sort of lost interest in cryptocurrency, so I still have that material on my website, but I moved it away, so most people don't care about it. We'll mostly talk about normal encryption. If you're interested, you'll find at the bottom of the projects page a whole bunch of cryptocurrency projects you can work on, but most people I think are not going to do that. So we're going to do the basics, and so we start with old-fashioned cryptography before computers, and then talk about the perfectly secure system that's been around for about 200 years, and why we're not using it. It might seem like we ought to use the perfectly secure system, but you'll see what the weakness of it is, and then we'll talk about basics of encryption. So here's the basic idea. You have a message of some kind. You call that plain text. That's something people can read. You don't want anybody reading it except the authorized person, so you encrypt it with a key, creating ciphertext. And the ciphertext is scrambled, so nobody can figure out the plain text from it. The person at the other end who has the key and has the decryption algorithm can convert the ciphertext into the plain text, but what you hope is that other people who get a copy of the ciphertext cannot get in because they don't have the key, and perhaps because they don't know the algorithm. That's the idea. So the classical ciphers would do things like just shift things in the alphabet. 2,000 years ago, when very few people could read at all, it was military security to just scramble the letters a little bit, so all you did was take the letters and move them forward in the alphabet a little bit. Take C, D, E, F, A, B, C, D. So you'd take Caesar would turn into F, D, H, V, D, U, and in order to roll it back, you'd have to move everything back in the alphabet 3 steps. So it's a very simple process, but it was enough to conceal messages long ago. And you can easily do it in Python. If you want, you do not need to do Python programming for the projects here, although it helps to do a little Python programming. Here's an example of the kind of program that would do this. Now the problem with this encryption system is, the fundamental problem with this is the key space is too small. You're shifting things in the alphabet, so you can only shift them from, say, 1 to 25 or 26 letters before they wrap around again, so there's only like 25 possible keys. So you can easily do a brute force attack. You can just take the shift go, try shifting through all the letters, and just, here's the original text was KHOR. If you shift it by 0, it hasn't changed. Shift it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And you'll find down here, if you shift it by 23, it turns into hello. So you can explore the whole key space. This is a brute force attack. You try every possible key, and then you hope that only one of them will become readable, which is normally the case. Usually what happens is all of them are unreadable garbage except for one, and that therefore you can break in without knowing the key. So the Caesar cipher is not a secure cipher. People can get in without the key. So people tried to improve it. Now the Vignir cipher will have another key, like they drink the tea up here. Then you have your message here, and you D-U-H-D. All right, the message is they drink the tea. That's the clear text. The second key here is D. This is the message. This is the key. D-U-H, D-U-H, D-U-H. And the point is you don't use the Caesar cipher, but you use a shift of 3 here for D, use a shift of 20 on this one, a shift of 7 on this one, and then it repeats 327. So there's not a uniform shift pattern down here. There's 3 shift patterns intermingled. So that will make it much more difficult to crack. It still could crack it for such a simple thing as a 3-letter key, but that's one way to make it more difficult. That's not a monoalphabetic substitution cipher. It's a polyalphabetic substitution cipher, where the same letter might turn into any of several different letters. So you can break it by finding areas that repeat, like here's WBL and here's WBL again. So if a common word like the appears, and then a common word like the appears again, starting at the same point in the second cycle, you'll see a repeated pattern. So that's something you could do to deduce something about the key length and so on. You'll still find some patterns in the output. This is a real important thing to understand. What you want in a good cryptographic system is, even though the input probably has a lot of patterns, like if it's English, the letter T is far more common than any other letter, and there are common letters like the and a, and there are spaces between the words. There's a lot of patterns there. You want all those patterns to go away. You want your ciphertext to just be random data with no patterns. If there are any patterns in the output, then you can usually use them to crack the cipher and weaken it. And here there are patterns. If a 3-letter word appears here, it appears again, another multiple of 3 down, it'll repeat down here, and that's a repetition in the output reflecting a real repetition in the input, and that is a flaw that will make it easier to crack the cipher. Let me check for comments in the Twitch. There are no new ones? Okay. All right. So one of the most common techniques is frequency analysis, and as I say, in the English language, E is by far the most common letter, then T, then A, and so on. So if you have any monoalphabetic substitution cipher where the letters are just replaced by other letters, you can quickly crack it, even with the smallest sample as just a few sentences, by just finding the most common letter, and that's pretty much got to be E or T. All right, so here's a Caesar program that will convert everything to uppercase and preserve spaces. Anyway, you can do a lot of these things. So here you can take a message like 7 years ago and it turns into this junk. Now this is the Caesar cipher, so it's not very strong. And you notice it also preserves patterns. I can see the spaces between the words, which is a real serious flaw. I can, for example, find a single letter word here. Well, that pretty much has to be A or I. Then I have a 2-letter word here. That's probably as or to. So looking for things like, then I can find double letters, and there's only a few options for them. That's how you crack these. If they have preserved patterns in the output, you can pretty quickly find weaknesses. So you make a frequency counter, and it'll just show you how popular they are, and you see that H is very common, and W is very common, and Q and R, so you don't have to try too many shifts before you find out what the shift is. That's how you crack it. So those are ancient ciphers, and you can't use them anymore without adding more to them. So here's the general idea. Permutation transforms a letter to another letter. That's what Caesar cipher does. Then you have a mode of operation. This is how you handle messages of arbitrary size. Now, in a Caesar cipher, you process the letters one at a time, so there is no issue of the message size. The output size is exactly the same as the input size, and you can handle any length. You'll see later, most modern ciphers have a block size, like 64 or 128 bits, and therefore there is an issue. If your input is not the right size, you're going to have to do something like pad it to make it multiples of the block size. So the permutation should be determined by the key. Obviously, different keys should make different permutations, and the thing I mentioned before, it should look random. There should be no patterns in the ciphertext. If there are, they're going to create weaknesses that can be used to crack it. So the mode of operation, like I say, Caesar cipher encrypts letters one at a time. Therefore, if I encrypt the word hello, I have a double letter here. That's really bad. That's, again, a pattern in the output that reflects a pattern in the input, and that means you're not really concealing some information that came in. That's not good. This is called electronic codebook mode, and we'll see the flaws this makes later. So let's move on to the perfect system. Been known for centuries, the one-time pad. Now, you need some way to combine two things, and it's typically done with XOR. XOR is for binary. It combines 2 bits, and the rule is if the 2 bits are the same, the answer is 0, and if the 2 bits are different, the answer is 1. That's why it's called exclusive OR. The first number or the second number, but not both, can be 1 to get an output of 1. So you can now encrypt a stream of bits. If I have plain text of ABC, and here's how ASCII encryption does it. This is 65, 66, 67 in binary. You put in a key. The key is just a random stream of bits, and now you XOR them. So this is 0, XOR 0 gives you 0, 1 XOR 1 gives you 0, 0 XOR 1 gives you 1 because the bits are different, 0 XOR 0 gives you 0, and so on. So now you can create an output which is randomly changed from the input. Now, as long as the key is random and no part of it is ever reused, then there is no pattern at all in the output. There's no later part of the message that is related mathematically to an earlier part. If there's something like a double letter in the input, it does not turn into a double letter in the output, and so on. So this is essentially the perfect system. This is called the one-time pad. You'll never break into this. And one fundamental problem with it is, even if you consider doing a brute force attack with every possible key stream, if you do that, you will create every possible plaintext message, so you will not find that they're all gibberish except for one you can read. You'll create every possible message, including all the possible readable messages of that length. So you cannot even get in with a brute force attack, even if you had enough time to try every possible key. So it's unbreakable. There's no way to get in at all. The only problem is, you have to previously have distributed enough key to the other person that they never have to reuse any part of the key. So you have to, through some other secure mechanism, you'd have to give them megabytes or gigabytes of key and use them. And when you've used them, you can't use them anymore. That's the problem. The problem is key distribution. How do you deliver this huge key to the person at the other end securely? But if you can, do it, then you're in good shape. All right. And so let's try a Kahoot. Let me check for questions. No new questions. All right, Kahoots are here. These are just little quizzes. They're worth extra credit. And let me resize the window to make sure the important part is visible. So you can go to this website, kahoot.it. It's an Italian website, and put in that number, and you can get extra credit if you're in the top 3 of people playing the Kahoot. Saw Not Me a couple nights ago. That's a good name. Maybe I've got everybody coming. All right, so which item must be kept secret? Keep secret. The military likes to keep their algorithms secret too, but most everybody outside the military uses well-known algorithms, and the only thing kept secret is the key. All right. All right, what's the weakest system on this list? Caesar ciphers out of date and weak. This happens, by the way, to almost all cryptographic systems. As time passes, computers get faster and new mathematical techniques appear, and we have to upgrade them. All right, what's the most difficult to use? Almost never used because that key distribution problem is such a problem. We use inferior attempts to simulate it instead of using it. All right, so what process allows messages of various sizes to mode of operation, and we'll have a lot more to say about that as we go ahead. All right, so the first set of winners. All right. Marcus from previous classes, and Jeremiah, I think, is the real name. Not me. Will not get their points unless they tell me who they really are at some point. You could put a message in Twitch, or you could put a message in Canvas, or somehow let me know. If you never tell us who you are, you won't get points. But anyway, be aware of that. One thing about using a fake name, which you're allowed to do, but that's the risk. All right, so to rate the security of an encryption system, what you have to do is specify, this is true, by the way, of all security, cybersecurity and otherwise, you have to start with attack threat modeling. You have to decide what attack are you worried about, and then you can rate how strong it is against that attack. You can't just put a security number on anything in the blue. So you make attack models that specify what sort of attacks might happen, and then you're able to make a decision. How difficult would an attack be? So here's an example, build $1 million cluster to decrypt something. They say, no, just hit the guy with this club until he gives us the password. And this is the fundamental point. There is always a weakness in your system. For example, if I have encryption on your computer and you're writing an email and you're encrypting it, I could just sneak a camera into your room and take a picture of your screen before you send it. Then I get the message. It doesn't matter how good your encryption is. So you have to understand, encryption only protects it against certain kinds of attacks. There are always other attacks that will find the information. All right, so Kirchhoff's principle is the one I talked about. This is what most people recommend, is to not have a secret cipher, but instead to use a well-known, public, trusted system and only keep the key secret. If people will not tell you what form of encryption you use, you should just not trust them, because it usually means they made up something, and if you made up something, all you prove is how stupid you are, because all the most powerful mathematicians in the world have worked for millennia and developed the best systems using all the most sophisticated techniques, and if you just had a bright idea in the shower and you think you have a good cryptographic system, it invariably turns out that that is something somebody else thought of a couple of hundred years ago, and there's a problem with it, and there's a reason why you should just use something normal like RSA or AES. If you won't tell people what you're using, it's almost always the case that you're using something stupid. What you should use is the standard thing that has been tested and trusted. All right, this is summarized by don't roll your own crypto. All right, so there's various kinds of attacks. Ciphertext only attack is what I described before. All you have is the ciphertext. You don't have the plaintext or the key. You might know the encryption method, but you're trying to break it just by looking at the ciphertext. Now, known plaintext is where you're able to pump in plaintext and get the ciphertext, and then you can pump in plaintext trying to put in special text like all A's or all zeros or something that might give you some answer that's easier to guess. Then that's chosen plaintext, I should say, where you can put in what you want. Known plaintext is where you know what it is, and chosen ciphertext is where you can somehow perform decryption. And these are various possible types of attack where you have some information, and you can discuss how strong your encryption technique is against these various types of attacks. In a gray box model, you can also tamper with the system's internals, and almost every cryptographic system fails this way, because there's something else. There's mathematics, where you have this abstract series of bits, and then you have a mathematical process that turns them into some other series of bits, and you can analyze that. But to do it on a real machine, you have to have real hardware, and the hardware is in circuits, and the circuits have defects, and they consume power, and they emit radio, and they take a certain amount of time, and it turns out that almost everything is vulnerable to side channel attacks, where there is something about the actual operation of the device that can leak out information, like the timing or the power consumption. And then there are invasive attacks where you actually modify the system, like injecting electrical faults, making bits flip with lasers, dissolving parts of the chip, lowering the power supply so the chips make more errors. Sometimes these are possible. If you lose a laptop, if someone physically steals your laptop and your laptop is encrypted, then people perform these invasive attacks where they're doing things like freezing the chip with cold fluid and putting it into another machine and using acid to dissolve some of the circuits and so on. And that's another issue. You can decide how secure your system is against attacks like that. We check for comments in the Twitch. There are no new ones. All right. So here's your goals. Indistinguishability, one I mentioned before, the ciphertext should just look random. Non-malleability, would mean I cannot modify the ciphertext and create meaningful plaintext. Indistinguishability against a chosen plaintext attack means two identical plaintext strings must produce different ciphertexts. Notice the Caesar cipher fails this. When I tried to encrypt a word with a double letter, I got a double output letter. So every time the same letter comes in, the same letter goes out. This is bad. That's why you should be adding some random bits each time you encrypt, so that even if you have a repeated area of data of inputs that's the same, the output is not the same, so it does not preserve patterns in the input in the output. So asymmetric encryption is what's another technique that's essential for the modern internet. Public key encryption, you have two keys, a public key that you publish for everyone and a private key that you held secret. And now you can receive secret messages. Anybody can use your public key to encrypt stuff, and only the holder of the private key can decrypt it. So the problem is it's one way. It's like the mail slot in your door. I have a door, and you can send mail into the door, which is fine. I can receive mail, but I can't send mail this way. However, it's extremely useful, very important, but it's typically done along with symmetric key encryption. So there's other things ciphers can do besides encryption. For example, authentication. Encryption means that no third party can read the message, but you might also want to have that message signed so you know it came from the trusted person. That's called authentication. And so one type of encryption that's often used is authenticated encryption with associated data, where not only is it encrypted, but it also comes with a tag which proves that the message has not been altered and identifies the author. This is very common in financial institutions, where a message is sent from one branch to another, and it also tagged to mean not only is it encrypted, but we also proved that only the trusted person sent it. Then there's format preserving encryption. So even if you put in a zip code, the encrypted form still looks like a zip code. If you put in an IP address, the encrypted form still looks like an IP address. This is something people might do when they have a database that was originally intended to contain unencrypted data, and now they want to add encryption without restructuring the database. And then there's homomorphic encryption. This is amazing and wonderful. This is the idea where you can use data without decrypting it. There are many people trying to develop this product. They've been trying to develop it over the last 15 or 16 years. The early versions of it have been very slow, but you'll hear commercials about it, encrypting data in use. And a simple case, I'm a member of Kaiser, everybody at the college is. Kaiser has my whole medical record. So anybody who has, like my doctor, or anybody else at Kaiser who can log in, can read my whole medical history. Now suppose during the pandemic, you carried around this card to prove that you'd taken a vaccine. Someone might want to verify that I'd taken a vaccine. With fully homomorphic encryption, they could make a query of a database to find out just one fact. Did you take this vaccine? They would not log in and see my whole medical history. They would just be able to get one fact only out of the database. This is a very valuable technique. People are still working on making it fast enough to be useful, but it would preserve a lot of privacy. And that's, like I say, searchable encryption. You can search encrypted data without decrypting it. And one of the products is Enveil, is a product that claims they're doing this. You encrypt the data in use. It never gets decrypted even when you're using it. And it's used in blockchains. This is called, the name will come back to me. So let me just bring this up since I brought it up. If you go to the projects, which we're going to talk about a little later, here's 141, and here's the projects. If I go to the cryptocurrency projects, which are probably most people don't want to do anymore, but one of the more interesting ones is, I may not be able to remember the name of this thing. It may still be in here. It's probably be in mathematics here. Yeah, okay. Yes, here are ZK snarks. That's what these things are. ZK snarks are zero-knowledge proofs. You can build a cryptographic object that interrogates encrypted data and gives you an answer to a question without decrypting the entire data. These things are called snarks. They're used in blockchains, they're used in side chains, and they're also used in the most modern techniques to try to make privacy-preserving encryption. All right. Then there's tweakable encryption. This is what happens in hard disks. You could encrypt a hard disk, encrypt the whole hard disk with a single key, But that's not what's done because the standard written by National Institute of Standards considered multiple users for the hard disk. So instead of just encrypting the whole hard disk with the same key, you have a tweak parameter so the files belonging to one user are encrypted with one key, and the files belonging to a different user are encrypted with a different key, and now the user that logs in will be able to only use their files but not other people's files. So that's another form of encryption. And so, what can go wrong in encryption? The simplest thing is that you have a weak cipher, like the Caesar cipher. 2G phone networks used a weak cipher called A51, and this was vulnerable to a time memory trade-off. You could crack it by making a table to look up answers to speed up your attempt to go through all the keys. The same thing, by the way, was true of Microsoft password encryption before Windows XP. When they used an old system called LM hashes, you could make a memory image that was a lookup table that made it possible to try every possible hash value and crack it, and that was true of 2G phone calls. And another one is the padding oracle attack, which we'll do in the projects. For a long time, the favored method of encryption was called cipher block chaining, where the output of each encrypted block was used to initialize the next block, and this turned out to create a kind of subtle pattern in the output that could be used to deduce the key if you got an error message that gave you a little bit of information about what type of error came out. And so that's important. This is why people are often afraid of encryption. If you implement encryption and you make a small mistake, like just giving the user an error message that tells them a little more information than you should have told them, it can ruin the whole thing. That's why I'm teaching this course. You need to know how to use encryption correctly, and then it really protects you. If you use it sloppily, then of course you often don't get the protection you want. So let's try another Kahoot. I've got them in one of these tabs here. There we go. No, that's not the right one. That's the one. Okay. All right, so how does a user know whether a cipher is safe to use? You have to do attack modeling. There's no such thing as perfect safety. You have to say safe against what? Against this particular attack. And that applies to all forms of security. If anybody just says my product is secure, they are generally lying to you like a marketing person. They are using language sloppily, and a security expert will always complain. There's no such thing as just plain security. What there is secure against this. Nothing is secure against every possible attack. All right, what category includes these things, COA and KPA? black box models. You only know what's going in and what's coming out. You don't know anything about the algorithm in the middle. So they are black box models, where the only thing you're aware of is some of the inputs and some of the outputs. All right, what category includes things like lowering the power supply voltage? That's an invasive attack. I modify the system to get in. And so that's a different kind of attack than one that would attack the mathematics or look for patterns. All right, how about side channel attacks? Where do they go? Gray box models. You don't modify the operation of it, but you measure something beyond just the inputs and outputs, something like the power supply consumption, the radio emitted, the time it took to do things. That's a gray box model. All right. All right. There's another pseudonym. Tell me their name if they want their points. These are real names. All right, let me stop this.